So, evening everyone. Welcome to the Warwick Sustainability Summit, November 2021. We've got a great lineup for you this evening. We have the update on the university progress, the COP26 discussion, the Coventry solar project, the UN SDG report, the Plant and Nature Society, a Q&A panel towards the end, and obviously the end of the event. So first, I would like to pass on to Chris Enyu, the Provost at the University of Warwick, with the portfolio for sustainability. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, David, and thanks everybody for joining us this evening. It's great to have the opportunity to participate in this event in a way that is, for somebody who lives a distance from the university, is certainly more sustainable than normal. And it's also good to have the opportunity to talk to you about how we're developing and coordinating our work in this area. So if I can begin with if we go to the next slide, just to give you an overview of what I'd like to cover tonight. And essentially what I'm going to do is talk to you about the pathways. These are the areas where we're focusing our attention, the things that we are seeking to deliver. I want to tell you a little bit about our route map, the way to sustainable, and that's something that we'll be launching publicly in spring. And I'd like to say a little bit at the end on some of the challenges that we face. I'll also just add that this year, for the first time, we secured observer status at COP26. You'll hear a lot more from my colleagues later on that. We were one of a select group of universities that was able to participate. It's our first time. We've got lots to learn and lots to think about in terms of how we use that learning to magnify our impact. So let me go on then to the next slide and just highlight the pathways. You may have seen these before, but I want to reiterate these emerged from the work that was done by our Climate Emergency Task Force following the Climate Emergency Declaration in September 2019. And you'll see here carbon is front and central in terms of our emission reductions targets. Zero carbon from direct emissions by 2030 and from indirect and direct by 2050. But I would stress that one of the things we recognised was the need to work within a broader SDG agenda, and particularly for our research and teaching, the SDGs will frame a lot of what we want to and need to do. We've highlighted the absolute criticality of developing and embedding sustainability within our curriculum. And as a reminder, yes, carbon is front and central, but ecology and biodiversity net gain are of huge significance to this institution. And if we go on to our next slide, when you see the route map that we're going to launch, this will emphasise that we need to focus around our sustainable campus, around our teaching, and around our research, and these will be the three key strands of activity through which we hope to make a difference. What I want to talk about tonight is not necessarily the detail of those areas of activity, but some of the themes that we want to use to guide our actions, how we'll try to lead by example, how we'll be guided by our insight, how we want to go further than net zero, how we want to engage with the economy, and how we want to be embraced by people and communities. So I'm going to go on and say a little bit about each of those. So if we go to the next slide, leading by example. So this is about us trying to demonstrate that we are doing the right thing, because if we can't do that, then we can't expect others to. And there are a number of areas in which we've made a lot of progress. There's still a lot that we need to do. But let me just highlight, we have reduced our carbon emissions per unit of income quite substantially over the past 15 years. That's offset by the challenge of being a growing institution. but we do self-generate around 50% of our energy through 3 combined heating and power plants that service 150 buildings, plus, of course, a significant network of PV panels. I think I'd also suggest that COVID has given us a real boost, as we've seen quite a significant reduction in carbon for scope 1 and 2 over the period because of lockdown. The key, I think, is how we learn from that in order to sustain some of the gains that we've made during that period. And that's about building energy efficiency targets, but it's also going to be around things like new transport arrangements. We're also working quite hard around our construction practices and looking to ensure that new buildings are completed to BREEAM excellent standards and beyond, working towards passive house. But then also we've got to think about waste management and how we look to improve our impact there, and the broader agenda around well-being on campus, getting more people running, cycling, walking, and our work with Sustrans in that area, and significant work around waste reduction in our commercial operations, particularly around food waste. And recently we've launched our biodiversity strategy, which puts in place an ambitious commitment to enhance the biodiversity on campus over the coming years, to protect and enhance and create new habitats. So those areas are examples of where we are trying to lead and make a difference. But let me take you on to the next slide, and this is about the notion that we have to look to go further than net zero. Yes, as I said earlier, carbon should be front and central, and net zero is a critical step on the way to sustainable, but that's not enough. One of the clear pieces of feedback from COP, and I think you'll hear this from colleagues shortly, was the real challenges around climate justice. You'll also hear more of that when we hear about the SDG report that Alistair will speak about a little bit later. But in this further than net zero area, I think our research agendas are absolutely key. And this is where I would perhaps want to highlight the work we do around global health in our Interdisciplinary Centre for International Development, in our Institute for Global Sustainable Development, in our Crop Centre, all areas where we're trying to have an impact, a real impact on options for sustainable development. In all that we do, if we go on to our next slide, one of the things that we have really tried to stress is the idea that we should be guided by insight. As a university, research is key to what we do. We use our research because we're looking to make a difference on campus and beyond. And the insight that we generate for others is also the insight that we should be using ourselves. We need to build on the real disciplinary strengths that we have here at Warwick, but also work with our global research priorities. And these bring together researchers across multiple disciplines to bring those different insights into quite complex and wicked problems. So we can bring our researchers together to look at areas such as the future of mobility, sustainable transport solutions. And you'll see some of those examples actually happening on campus at the moment, whether it's the scooters, whether it's the autonomous pods. But we also need to look at areas such as fairer food systems, how we can impact on crop yields sustainably. I think about our work on offshore and renewable energy, hydrogen heating, and the work we do around battery technologies and energy storage. And that's just not just about the development of battery technologies and forms of storage, it's also about how we recycle those. So we look to use this both on campus but beyond. The next theme within our route map is, on the next slide, is this idea of being powered by the economy. And I think this reflects a strong conviction that the way we approach sustainability has to make economic sense. There's often a view that the economy and the environment are in conflict. That doesn't have to be the case, and indeed we need it not to be the case. So we need to think about how we can work with business to build a circular economy, to help the preparations that we need for a carbon neutral world, and support businesses as they work towards the development of a sustainable future. So if I look at our chemistry department, they're working with a range of partners to develop commercially viable, sustainable solutions to recycling and reusing flexible plastic packaging. The image you see there is from the work of Warwick Manufacturing Group. WMG researchers have been working with a number of partners to design and build a new very light rail vehicle. You'll see an example here, and this is ready to go into prototyping in Coventry and has the potential to really transform how people move across our city, but also beyond, in a sustainable way. Electrification is a key area of strength in what we do, and electrification technologies have a crucial role to play in securing a net zero agenda. And then if we go somewhere completely different, we think about a recent initiative. You'll see a picture there of some haricot beans, but these are haricot beans developed by scientists in a crop centre, designed to grow in a UK climate, suited to being harvested by standard farm machinery, contributing towards sustainable food production. And then if I go on to our final theme on the next slide, which is the notion of being embraced by people and community. And I think for me, this is a really strong and key theme, because this is about the work we do to ensure not just that current generations, but future generations are informed, educated, engaged in sustainability, who will not just work with us, but direct us, push us, challenge us to work in a sustainable way and to drive forward sustainability in all that we do. The obvious example here, I think, is the transdisciplinary programs we offer around global sustainable development, and we've got colleagues here from cross-faculty studies who've developed those programs. And these are, I think, really transformative programs that work both as independent programs, but also in partnership with other disciplines to really drive understanding in this area. But alongside those unique programs, I think the other thing that we see growing is the specialist master's provision, and you'll see a couple of examples there, but also the notion of trying to embed elements of sustainability across all of the programs that we teach, so that all of our students have the opportunity to learn. And of course, it's not just our student community, it's also our staff community, and indeed the communities beyond our campus. And I think we have a lot more to do in supporting learning around sustainability beyond the immediate campus community. And if we go on to the next slide, I think alongside our educational offer, I just want to highlight what we do in terms of understanding behaviour, how we can influence behaviour through, for example, the nudgeathons that help us to think about how we can change how people use and engage with energy. We've also, of course, on campus got our green champions who help us to drive change. We've got social business innovations happening off campus that will also help drive change beyond the boundaries of our communities. So getting people involved is absolutely key. And that's not just about the university centrally suggesting what people do, it's also about actually asking people like you to come back and challenge us so that we can get better at the work we do. Now, finally, let me just go on to the last slide because I'm conscious of time. And what I'd like to do just on this last slide is think about the challenges that we face. And you may have seen this diagram before, you may not. It's the distribution of our university carbon emissions across all three scopes. And one of the things that I want to highlight in here is universities, research intensive universities, will also be energy intensive universities. And so we have some real challenges to think about how we're able to sustain our research and still manage the emissions that we generate. I think what we've also got to recognise nationally and internationally, there is a growing demand for higher education. More students want to study. That's particularly true actually internationally. But international higher education brings with it significant travel impacts. So how do we work in that space? How do we respond to the demand for higher education in a way that doesn't necessarily spike emissions? What do we do with the infrastructure and superstructure on campus? A lot of our estate is old and inefficient, but replacing it is wasteful. How do we get the right balance in there? How do we ensure that we all recognise the importance of going beyond carbon? And COP has been fantastic in many senses in terms of raising awareness, but it's got that focus on carbon, absolutely crucial, but can't be the limits of what we do. And the big challenge, how do we get more people involved? And we're going to need to keep talking about that because we need to engage many more people within and beyond our campus. At that point, I think I'm going to stop. Look forward to coming back to some of these issues when we have the panel later on. But let me at this point hand back to David, who I think is going to take us onto our COP panel. Thank you.
David, you are muted.
Yes, David, you are muted.
Thank you all. So I was just thanking Chris there for that presentation. It is fantastic to see how much the university has moved forward and where we're planning to go as well. Before we move on fully to the panel discussion, I've just got prepped a short presentation, very short, hopefully, of what COP is, why it was important, and some of the outcomes of it as well. So COP, or COP26, is this was the logo for this year. But what is COP? And for some reason this has come out as in an unusual order. Apologies for that. But COP is the conference of the parties, and the 26th is the 26th meeting. It's a formal meeting of international parties about climate change, run by the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and is attended by 197 countries that signed the UNFCCC. The aims are to review national communications and emissions targets, to assess the effects of measures taken, and analyse the progress made to achieving the ultimate objective of the convention, which is to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. Now, the Paris Agreement, which many of you will know about, created in 2015, had an outcome of trying to keep the temperature rise in this century well below 2 degrees, and pursue efforts to limit increase to just 1.5 above pre-industrial levels. And this is partially done through national determined contributions, or NDCs. Now, the difference between 1 and 2 degrees is quite large. As you can see, there's a number of factors, and obviously these aren't all the factors that it can be affecting, from extreme heat to sea level rise, ecosystems, coral reefs. You can see, I won't read these all out, but you can see some of the effects at just 1.5 degrees of change, and then how those affected with just the 0.5 degrees increase. So quite large impacts. So COP26, or as it's now become known as the Glasgow Climate Pact, recognised that the impacts of climate change will be much lower at 1.5 compared to 2 degrees, and resolved to pursue efforts to stay under a lower limit. It is, with these things, very much about the wording, and resolves in legal speak is quite powerful. It also starts an annual ministerial meeting on pre-2030 ambition, with the first being at COP27, which is next year in Egypt. The Pact then requests that countries revisit and strengthen their targets by the end of 2022, as necessary to align with the Paris Agreement temperature goal, taking into account different national circumstances. So this goes beyond the Paris expectation originally to update only every 5 years. The downside to this at the moment is that this request might be ignored by other countries in the same way that 40 countries actually failed to offer or update an NDC before COP26, and the Glasgow Pact actually urges those countries to complete before COP27. A pledge also from developed countries to at least double adaptation finances between 2019 and 2025, something that was also failed on from COP26. Many, if not all, the countries failed to meet that financial contribution. Recognition to the need to protect, conserve and restore nature and ecosystems, including through forests and other terrestrial, marine and ecosystems. And then also a number of pledges came from the COP as well. So over 137 countries, representing more than 85% of the world's forests, committed to halting and reversing deforestation and land degradation by 2030. The caveat to this, at least the one that I'm aware of, is that Brazil turned around at later stages and said only to end illegal deforestation, which is a lot smaller fraction of its actual overall deforestation. 108 world leaders signed up to the global methane pledge. We've also got various countries said that they would dedicate $8.5 billion to help South Africa decarbonize from its coal-heavy energy system. The UK said that at least 23 new countries joined a commitment to phase out and not build or invest in new coal power over the next few decades, and bring the number of signatories up to 190. 25 countries have joined the effort that aims to end public financing of the overseas oil, gas and coal projects by the end of 2022. And India pledged to cut its carbon emissions to net zero by 2070 and increase its share of renewable energy output from 450 gigawatts per year to over 500 gigawatts per year. So in a talk that myself and Vulcan were lucky enough to be part of, Fatih Barol of the International Energy Agency said that all climate pledges announced to date, this was towards the end of the first week, if met in full and on time, and he did put a caveat of that is a big if, would be enough to hold temperature rise to 1.8 degrees by the end of the century. Obviously 1.8 is still higher than the 1.5 that we so urgently need. So I'm now going to, I hope this works, add in our speakers. First we've got Jess Savage. Just gonna stop presenting at my end a moment so that I can feel this. Excellent. So Jess is Associate Professor and Deputy Head of the School of Global Sustainable Development. We've also got Vulcan, who is Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering. Apologies, Vulcan, I seem to be having trouble with your camera. Hopefully we can get you back in a moment. And then Laurie Vale, who's Associate Professor of Department of Economics as well. Hi all. So would you like to all make sure you're unmuted? I'm going to start with a couple of questions, but then hopefully I'm also going to ask if anybody's got any questions at all for this bit about COP26, then please do put them in the Q&A box for us as well, and we'll do our best to answer those too. So Laurie, as you're currently on screen, I'm going to start with you, and we'll just kind of go around and ask if you can answer these questions each, but keep the answers short to hopefully give us time to ask some other questions. How do you feel that COP26 went? Is the first question.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks, David, for the lovely introduction, and thanks for the summary that you provided about COP26 and what has been achieved. So in answering the question, because it's a question that I received so many times over the last 2 weeks, I mean, I don't think I can make a judgment on, you know, the success or unsuccessful experience of COP26. I think that what I think about the whole experience and, you know, being able to attend COP26 is that obviously the answer to this question depends on the expectations that we had before attending the event. So if I look at the expectations that I had, obviously I would probably say that I was quite disappointed with what has been achieved and what I've seen at COP26, because in my experience it was more about, you know, echoing the need for action rather than providing examples of actions and, you know, examples of good practice that we could bring back home and say, okay, this is what we need to do to improve and to live in a more sustainable world. But on the other hand, I know that more needs to be done to, you know, to make it more inclusive. And I know that, you know, there was a lot of disappointment regarding this and all the issues related to climate injustice. But I think that I felt it was quite an emotional experience, and I attended several side events where I saw lots of young people talking about climate change, lots of people coming from a diverse background, talking about climate change. And I think that this is, in some, you know, respect, it's an improvement. So I had the real feeling that the need for action message was there, and I think that this is important for us to you know, reflect on it and maybe come back home and pass at least this message to the people we have around us. So that's how, I mean, I don't want to comment on what has been achieved, because I don't think that, you know, this is what I should probably do here. But I think that passing the message that we should think about the issue and try to find solutions for climate change is what we need to talk about now.
Great. It helps if I unmute, doesn't it? That's great, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Jess now.
Hi David, thank you for that. if I'm 100% honest, I think COP for me was a very mixed experience. I went in hoping, I think the phrase I used when some students asked me how I was feeling ahead of COP was cautiously optimistic but ready to be disappointed. And I'd say that neither of those things happened. One thing that I really appreciated, actually, I think coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic was, one, actually how relatively safe things were, particularly in the blue zone, at least with the daily mandatory testing. But actually, as a result of that, how well conversations started to go when they weren't halted by Microsoft Teams, and how the conversations flowed more naturally in those like traditional conference coffee sessions where the mask of political mask comes off and people can speak more honestly. And I think that was a stark difference to me from necessarily what I was expecting. I was really pleased to see more recognition for the environment in general, and kind of linking into what Chris was saying earlier about the need to go beyond carbon. And methane really starting to be recognised, discussions about much more comprehensive discussions about ecosystem restoration, the values of peatlands, afforestation, and the values that different habitats have, particularly from a carbon sequestration point of view. And that was something that maybe it's just because obviously I was attending for the first time, but I felt had been missed out of former COPs. So in that respect, I think it was positive. Some people have claimed that COP was a failure, and I don't think it was a failure. I think it was certainly better than doing nothing. But I still feel a little bit disappointed with the outcome overall. But again, like I said, I went in ready, cautiously optimistic, but ready to be disappointed. And I wasn't optimistic, and I wasn't overly well, I was a bit disappointed. But on the whole, it was an eye-opening experience that I'm glad it happened.
Thank you, Jess. And then I'm going to hopefully pass over to Vulcan. Hopefully this you can work. There we go. Excellent.
Yes, there I am. Hello everyone. Good evening. I'm Volkan. So how it went? I believe it went as expected, because I think no one was expecting a dramatic change, and the dramatic change didn't happen. But it was important step forward, I think. And we may debate whether it was a big step or a small one. But eventually we went forward, and it accelerated. I think COP accelerated our speed forward. That's why I find it positive. I know that there are mixed feelings among our colleagues and also among everyone, I think, about the impact of COP and also our impact in COP. These mixed feelings exist. I felt personally as a small cog in a big machine, to be honest, when I was there. And I believe every other organization felt similarly, because whoever I talked to was overwhelmed with the size and the wide scope of it. But I take it a little bit positive, because we all made an incremental but important, significant contribution and make the event happen. And every organization's, everyone's presence, I think, increased the pressure and made a contribution. And maybe that's why I find also the presence of Warwick in COP26 very meaningful. These are, in general, my feelings. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vulcan. So we're going to go on to the next question. I'll keep you highlighted. What do you feel was your biggest takeaway from COP?
Who will start, David?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Shall I continue?
Yeah, please do. What was your biggest takeaway from COP?
Oh, my biggest takeaway. Okay, so I think what I took as a positive from the COP26 is that the event had a kind of PR element in it. It was a kind of showcase for many people who are attending to it. But I take it as a positive. I mean, you may think that this may be negative, but I find it positive because it made many policymakers, ministers, industry leaders, governors, everyone to contemplate on the challenges that we are facing. And it pushed everyone, I think, to do something because they were all at the forefront, and it was a PR, and they had to do something and say something. Even this small push to all these people to be in the showcase, I think is quite positive as well. I think that's why I'm also happy that COP26 is, makes maybe sustainable more fashionable. That's my takeaway, the most positive takeaway, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to come over to Laurie next. What was your biggest takeaway?
Sorry, I was muted. I think that what the lesson I've learned is that we should think about, well, we should talk about climate change in a more with more optimism. So we should kind of be more optimistic about what humans can achieve. I mentioned before that there were not many examples of things that we could do, you know, in these side events and this panel discussion. But one of the sessions I attended, which I found very interesting, was about afforestation. And they were sort of explaining, you know, how in African countries they had started to plant plants and you know, to get the local communities involved in this process, and how successful was this, you know, these examples for them to follow. And I think that, you know, spreading a little bit of more optimism about the whole problem and issue would probably help. So not telling people, you know, a natural catastrophe is going to happen if we don't do anything, but just bringing, you know, examples of good practice to convince people that we can make this change, we can make it. Obviously, you know, a lot of effort is needed from many different parties, but I think that being pessimistic is not helping at all. So that's the lesson I've learned.
Thank you, Laurie. And then Jess?
So I think, kind of leading off what Laurie was just saying about optimism, it sounds strange given my earlier comment about how things went, but you know what, the best thing about COP26 for me wasn't actually in COP, it was the side events, it was the demonstrations, it was the number of people in Glasgow passionate about it. And actually it was the number of people, you know, in my own life that I wouldn't think were environmentally aware at all, suddenly going, oh my God, COP26, you're going, that's incredible. And I'm like, wait, you even know what that is? And, you know, back with COP21, with the Paris Agreement, and, you know, even 22, 23 and 24, people didn't know what it was. It wasn't a thing. And I don't know if that's just in a UK context that hosting it in Glasgow suddenly put it on our radar, but people know what COP is now. Well, COP26 anyway, for UNFCCC. And I think that in itself is a solid movement. When COP27 comes around next year, people are going to know what it's about. And I think that's a really positive change that's come out of the UK hosting it that wasn't the case previously. So that's kind of my optimism for the future, that, you know, for people to make change, they need to be aware of it, and they need to have that, as Laurie was saying, not terrified or afraid or unknowing feeling about it, but actually feel empowered to be able to make change. And so that starts with awareness, and I feel like COP26 has brought the beginning of that awareness. So that's my hope coming out of this.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a lot more people aware of COP now, whether it's COP21 or COP26. I hope that same awareness is the same in other countries. I think it is, but I've not kind of checked that yet. But yeah, it did seem to draw people from around the world together into the conversation a bit more than they have been previously. We haven't received any questions at all yet, but I'm also aware of time. So unless one goes in the next few seconds, then we will move on to our next speakers. And thank you so much to our three panelists, Jess, Vulcan and Laurie. I'm aware that Jess and Laurie need to go, and hopefully Vulcan will be able to stick around for the panel at the end of the evening. Thank you all. So we're going to move next to a piece of student research. Some of our students have been working out with a local business, basically looking at solar panels across the city. So I'd like to invite Rex Chu and Peter Vazel to join us. I believe though Peter is a recent graduate. Is that correct, Peter?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I'm a master's student now, but technically.
Excellent. So Rex, do you want to share your screen, and I'll get your slides up on for everyone to view, and I will pass over to the two of you. If you'd like to add anything to your introductions, then please do so.
Right, yeah, that was good. Thank you very much. Okay, you are muted as well, Rex. I'm just working out how we're going to do this. So I'll do the first couple of slides and we'll do it like we did. Okay, so hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Peter, and so me and Rex have been working on this project essentially with Climate Change Solutions, a Coventry-based advocacy group. Company type thing, and essentially what we've been doing is oh, next slide please, Rex. There we go. So we've been working in the backdrop of or these headlines have been in the backdrop of the work that we've been doing over the summer, and I'm sure obviously everyone's familiar with the kind of the double threat of the climate crisis and the national grid, current infrastructure for energy that we have not really being up to the task anymore. And how are we going to fix this problem, and what are we going to do about it? And essentially what we've been doing is we've been mapping the solar generating potential of the city of Coventry. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Rex for the next slide. He's going to tell you about some of the advantages of solar and why we should choose solar panels.
Thank you, Peter. So as we all would probably know, there are multiple benefits of having solar panels, and there are broadly three dimensions: the environmental, the social, and also the economic side. And so if I start off with the environmental side, getting solar PVs to the rooftops in Coventry would make a major contribution to the Coventry and Warwickshire 2030 climate emergency, and it would also be a step in implementing the UK government's 2014 roadmap to a brighter future, where they claim that solar PV is gaining popularity and would become a kind of significant energy source for the UK in the future. And then on the social side, our projects would kind of create jobs and also create awareness of what can be achieved with wide-scale commercial rooftop solar panels. And on the kind of economic side, we would reduce the long-term cost of solar, which has been dropping quite significantly over the past decades already. And it will also enhance energy security and kind of self-sufficiency for both the Coventry city and also the UK in general. And so now I would like to hand over to Peter to talk about our approach and what we have done today.
All right, thank you very much, Rex. So our approach essentially is comprised of these three kind of interlocking phases. So firstly, we've got the phased review, which is essentially we go look at the map of Coventry, we look at Google Earth, and we try and find areas and places across the map where solar panels can be integrated into the urban fabric. So rooftop space, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Car parks, there's the idea that you can create these kind of carport type structures where the cars will park underneath and solar panels will be above. Coventry Canal, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But moving on to the tools that we've been used to map the generating potential across Coventry itself, we've used a couple of online tools, Open Solar, PVGIS, Google Earth Pro, and things like that. And essentially what we can do with these is we can generate proposals for the individual building level system cost and the energy generation capacity for individual systems. And we can also aggregate those together and scale it up to produce a number which we can use to demonstrate the extent of solar generating potential for the city as a whole. So something I forgot to mention right at the beginning of the PowerPoint is that we're doing this in the context of a 2012 government white paper, which said that 250,000 hectares of roof space across the country is prime candidate space for solar power and for solar panels to be put on it. And so what we're trying to do essentially is we're trying to get a more concrete number, a specific empirical number that we can find out through our mapping to demonstrate exactly how much of that is applicable to Coventry and how much energy can actually be produced in Coventry just through the natural resource of the sun and the roof space that is already available. So we're using that to try and engage with people, both on the big level with the city council, and that's more climate change solutions is trying to do that. And also on the individual level, we're hoping to be able to engage with building owners and with stakeholders to try and maybe get some of the designs that we've created actually instantiated in real life. So is it possible to go to the next slide, Rex? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the project and how we got to that quite grand idea. So we started out by having this idea. Well, I didn't start out, but Rex did, by having this idea for Coventry Canal. And if I'm correct in saying this, Rex, the idea is to put solar panels on top of the canal because it's more efficient to put solar panels on top of a body of water. Apparently the cooling evaporative effect of the water has the kind of purpose, well, has the ability to help cool down the solar panels so that they can actually produce more electricity, which is not something that I knew. Unfortunately, there's a lot of shading across the whole length of the canal. So the team kind of moved on from that to look at a slightly bigger picture. And here's an example with the canal basin. The team was looking across Google Earth, and you can see all of these warehouses and all these commercial buildings and large rooftops, which are prime candidates for solar power. So here we have nearly 300 solar panels across Coventry Canal Basin, just these buildings on the right here, and that produces 91,000 kilowatt hours a year, I think. Or would produce, is estimated to produce. So that's quite impressive. And also we have the city centre. So from the canal basin, we moved on to the city centre, which we created a map of different clusters. So the problem is that lots of buildings are butt up against one another, and there's kind of conflicting jurisdictions of who owns what. So if you want to produce nice big solar panel arrays in areas like this, you start to have the problem of who owns the building, and who do we even talk to. So the idea with these clusters is perhaps there can be agreements, buying agreements between different stakeholders to kind of create scale across the city and to have potentially solar generating arrays that are owned by multiple different groups and distributed equitably. And then after mapping the city centre, we mapped the whole of Coventry South, and and the black areas on that map are areas where there's lots of commercial buildings. I hope it's big enough. Last time we did it, this wasn't really big enough, but hopefully now it's on everyone's computer screens, it's big enough. Those are areas where there's lots of commercial buildings and roof space, which is prime, perfect candidates for solar power. So next slide, please, Rex. I'm going to just give 2 examples of the actual what we've been doing. So here's Liberty Pressing Solutions at Fletchworth Gate, and it's a sawtooth roof design, which is quite an old-fashioned industrial building design that was designed to let light in for workers, actually, but is a perfect type of roof design for solar power. So Liberty Pressing Solutions can actually produce over 800,000 kilowatt hours of power per year, and that's actually only half of the plant. The full plant, I think, can produce about double that. So yeah, that's a huge amount of electricity. And our next one, our final example, is CH Technical Recruitment. This can't produce anywhere near as much power, but is part of a 7 stars industrial estate. So our concept with a building such as this is that we would be able to create a cluster, maybe have some kind of power purchasing agreement between all of the stakeholders in the estate, in the industrial estate, where they would share infrastructure and resources to try and create like economies of scale. So yeah, I'm going to hand over back to Rex, and he's going to talk about the findings and the numbers that we've managed to create through this methodology.
So thank you, Peter. So currently we have mapped around 61% of all the areas we've identified with the potential for solar, and that's around 260 sites. And our findings is that we could actually generate nearly 100,000 megawatt hours, or like 100 gigawatt hours of electricity per year based on our estimations. And to put this into perspective, this is the equivalent of around 45,000 tons of CO2 averted, which would also mean around 45,000 cars taken off the road in the UK. And in terms of the electricity this generates, we could supply around 30,000 households in Coventry with the electricity generated from this project, and that is equivalent to around 20% of Coventry's domestic electricity needs. And in terms of the economic savings, so dependent on a number of factors, in the first year, we would save around £21 million in utility bills. And over the lifetime of 30-year lifetime of this project, which it could possibly go on for a lot more, but estimating for around 30 years system lifetime, we would save around 600, and we would have an estimate savings of around £663 million over the project life cycle. And now I would like to hand back to Peter to talk about the next steps of our project.
Okay, thank you very much, Rex. So, yes, first bullet point. So we haven't quite completed the mapping of the whole of Coventry yet, but we've done a lot of Coventry South, and we've done Jaguar Land Rover, for instance, 7 stars industrial estate, which I mentioned. We've done the city centre, Ricoh Arena, and not in Coventry South, but we've done it. We've done Torrington Avenue Industrial Estate, Cannon Park, right next to the university itself. So we've done huge areas. Next bullet point, please, Rex. And yeah, so that's essentially one of the big things that we want to do, is we want to demonstrate the capacity, because we think there's a huge capacity for solar energy generation across Coventry. And we think that we need to engage a wider audience with this, really. And at the same time, we want to engage stakeholders, and we want to kind of build on like the designs that we've created to potentially implement some of them in the future. And I think that the important things are to try and create an economies of scale, to negotiate with the local government, with the city council, to get them on board. We have this idea of using power purchasing agreements, so where a capital firm would come in and provide the capital, and then they would essentially like rent the roof space off of the different people like Seven Stars Industrial Estate and people like Liberty Pressing Solutions. If you've got anything to add to that, Rex, we're creating prospectuses currently for the for local government, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, and also, I guess, adding on to our first point about completing the mapping, we are actually looking for new recruits in our project. So if you are interested, just feel free to contact us, and we would be more than willing to get you on board to help us complete the mapping and to proceed on to the next stage in our projects, and hopefully bring this into reality in the future.
It's a very people-intensive project, so we need people to help us continue mapping the city and validating what we've already done. So yeah, but I think that's is this the future of Coventry? Is the question that I think we meant to start the PowerPoint with. There was a little headline in the beginning, and yeah, we think it should be. We think it kind of needs to be, really. We've mapped a huge area, as Rex mentioned earlier, and this little infographic here, or this little visualization here that we've got, shows that if we got all of the panels that we've mapped all together on these programs that we've done, it would cover pretty much the entire city centre. So we've done quite a lot, and there's still a lot more to do, and that is essentially our thesis. Let's make Coventry the UK's first solar-powered city. So yeah, thank you very much.
That's fantastic work, both of you. And it's great to see. It is fantastic to see all the work you've been doing on that. I understand you've been as well working with it's Tony McNally from Climate Change Solutions on that project, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so
Richard as well. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fantastic example of where students are actually working with local business to forward hopefully the changes that will happen in Coventry over the next few years. And I really hope that your information and your knowledge is used through that. And yeah, please do stick around, and we can join the panel towards the end as well. Thank you both. So next up, we've got Dr. Alistair Smith. Alistair is going to be giving an update on the most recent SDG report. Welcome, Alistair.
Thank you very much, David. So I'm just going to share my slides. I wonder, so my screen suggests that should be viewable by everyone else. Is that true?
It is now.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So I'm here to talk about the outcome from the reporting process that the university has been participating in for 2 cycles now, around the contribution of the university to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think the previous report started to signify a slight change of direction, really, in what happens conventionally with reporting, and we wanted to build upon that this year, taking the view that we wanted to go beyond reporting, that because we are an academic institution and we are academics involved in gathering this information and presenting it, it's a useful and appropriate thing to take a more critical edge to engaging with these issues, and of course with the main aspiration being to contribute to the university's role to create thought leadership, both within the community. So we hope this report will be engaged with by colleagues across the university in terms of recommendations, responses, but we also were hoping to send a signal to the wider world, so to make it a kind of a research output, if you like. So just a very small bit of background. Sustainable development. Obviously, it's a very big word in our lived experience at the moment. So hence, I've represented it to be very small, because it is, of course, contested or contested by a lot of other agendas that it has to fight for space with. So there's a kind of a big world for it to try to fill to gain some traction. I'm sure everyone is aware of the origins of this concept. So back into the 1980s, the agenda that grew through the United Nations, the recognition that a concentration on economic growth, without thinking explicitly about the sort of the social mechanisms that translate that growth into improved lived experience for individual people, was a problem. And an additional huge growing concern was the way that traditional models of development, national and international development, had started to impinge upon the availability of natural resources, and also to undermine what we would now term as the essential ecosystem services that support not only the human economy, but of course the entirety of human existence on our planet. So this is the origin of sustainable development, bringing together a concern for the economic, the social, and the natural world, as we term it. This won't be new to anyone, nor will the fact that the most recent kind of framework interpretation of this idea by the United Nations is the 17 development goals, sustainable development goals, to ideally to transform our world. And I think the concept, the emerging concept of transformation, is very interesting. I think a lot of people would look at that word and say that's a more politically correct way of saying revolution, isn't it? Because you're looking for fundamental change at all sorts of levels of organisation and outcome. But this is the United Nations agenda, and we're very likely familiar with these 17 priorities. The United Nations has always been very explicit in presenting that these are not independent kind of characteristics of our world. There is a huge complexity of interaction between them. But this is the framework which the University of Warwick has now decided to engage with. Maybe some people might say a little bit slow, considering they've been around since 2016. But nevertheless, joining this agenda formally through the pathway to the way to sustainable seems to be a very important contribution for the university to be making. But on this basis, the question arises as well: what is the role of the university in this context? And a number of colleagues have obviously already touched upon these ideas. Something we'll be very familiar with, of course, university as a site for the intensive production of knowledge, be this around kind of cutting edge knowledge through research, or this be the creation of knowledge for individuals for the first time through the process of teaching and education. Universities, of course, are one of the most independent sets of institutions in our society, so we really have the opportunity to create this thought leadership for change and transformation in our world to support the United Nations agenda. I think there's something particular about universities, however, that sets them aside from other research and education institutions, and that's what I think should be the central focus on having a philosophically embedded approach. So even when we're dealing with very technical subjects, like we might be doing research in laboratories, in theory, those people engaged in this process of knowledge creation are always referring back to their kind of philosophical, metaphysical understanding of what the world is and how is best to create knowledge about it depending on our subject. So we have a really unique set of sort of underlying tools and I guess a mission to contribute to this agenda. And of course, as has been alluded to, we're a huge operation, so we have the opportunity to turn round this knowledge creation on ourselves and feed this into our own operations. For example, the way that we administer our estates, the way that we think about our growth and development and technological application, etc. So this is something that the working group kind of agreed was a good a foundation and what the university should be doing. So then we wanted to continue to think about the Sustainable Development Goals from this perspective. And we recognise that a lot of research is done around particular issues. So, for example, the aspiration for there to be no poverty by 2030. This seems a goal that's unlikely to be met almost definitely now after the COVID crisis. But by thinking about the nature of the world and its complexity, of course, universities such as Warwick can start to create connections. So we can think about how poverty is fundamentally interrelated to this idea of zero hunger. We have known for a long time that one of the reasons that or the main reason that people go hungry isn't because there's a physical lack of food, but because people lack access to obtain that food. So there's a relationship between poverty and hunger, and therefore, of course, as the Provost alluded to, there is an opportunity to put these three things together. So where we are able to create decent work opportunities as driven by a sense of economic growth, this can then have positive impacts for, say, hunger and poverty. And this is this then encapsulates the idea of sustainable development as it was originally conceived. But you'll see from my image at the bottom, there's been academic critique to say this is quite a weak version of sustainable development, which might not be the best and most appropriate. And this is where things become much more complicated. The sort of the low-hanging fruit, as we often call it, starts to get higher and higher. We now start to think about the climate emergency, and I think it's important that we use that language all of the time when we talk about it. I don't think climate change is a sufficient term to encapsulate the gravity of the situation we're facing. So we start to think about the climate emergency, life below water and life on land, and here we start to realise that there aren't easy wins, which is something that a university should be prioritising to face and interact with. And actually, in fact, maybe the best way for a university to be thinking about sustainable development is not the three rings that interlock nicely in the middle, but a recognition of the reality that the economy sits within society, and all that sits within the planetary system. The planetary system, of course, is a finite system. We have incoming energy, a few space rocks, but not a lot else. So based on the information that we have at the moment, really the continued thought pattern that economic growth has a place in a genuinely sustainable human development trajectory is increasingly well, difficult to support, I would say. The logical extension of where we're heading is towards the boundaries of a finite system, and we're already starting to hit major tipping points for non-linear change. So these are all the complexities for academics to think through. And this is why, incidentally, that my personal view of COP is that it was exactly what I expected, and it's an unmitigated disaster for the future of humanity. But we can come back to that. So based upon this kind of intellectual background that we wanted to bring, the group hit upon the concept of nexus thinking. So thinking about the interaction between lots of complex elements. And there are lots of examples, so we might think about the relationship between water and energy and food, for example, and how these are all integrated. And we realise that this places the University of Warwick in a very strong position, because from the perspective of our research and the perspective of our teaching, we've been increasingly moving from a focus on disciplinarity, maintaining the disciplinary excellence, but moving towards an interdisciplinary approach and a transdisciplinary approach. And this is ideal for starting to engage in nexus thinking across these different categories between the different goals. So for our reporting, we decided to sort of set aside the usual kind of tick box exercise and to think a little bit in a more kind of complex pattern about what we were seeing the contribution of the university to be. Just to provide a bit of structure for sharing some of the highlights, because we're recognising the complexity of our world, and the Provost made reference to the concept of wicked problems. So problems that are so complex and sort of intractable that it's hard to sort of obtain any kind of traction when looking at them. And it seems appropriate to think about a variety of spectrums. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see things that we pretty much definitely agree about. They're really simple, and we've got a high degree of certainty that we understand it. Heading out, we move to a situation where we have a much less degree of certainty, and we're also far from agreeing as human beings, as academics, intellectuals, researchers, teachers, about the nature of what's going on and what might be done. And we noticed that the University of Warwick seems to be covering this spectrum very, very effectively. So one bit of research that we've highlighted in our report is interventions into look at air quality in cities, and particularly London. Here, researchers have started to generate increasingly complicated data sets that allow us to observe the sort of the busyness factor and the sort of the ebbs and flows of daily life and how this impacts air pollution. So we can start to think about a solution to quite a structured problem that might be appropriate. So creating real world value. To take another example of a research project that's gone in a different direction, so to think about the relationship between flooding and human experience, and particularly human memory and reading and interpretation. Now, this moves away from the idea of just a situation that's quite complicated, like air pollution, to the situation where something is complex. There are a series of interactions that aren't necessarily linear. The role of humans and subjective interpretation, of course, create the possibility for a whole variety of responses and feelings and memory. But because of the university's foundation in this kind of philosophically reflective and critical research base, we have the opportunity to tackle these questions that certainly matter to humans and their experience of life. Moving on, of course, we're being a research-led university, we're converting all the time our research and cutting-edge thinking into our teaching and learning practices, and we're able to point very proudly to examples where students have taken on that learning to create their own initiatives. So the report also highlights the Warwick Cup initiative, which was an effort by students to replace disposable cups and therefore high levels of wastage and resource use, to create more of a circular and contained economy, to provide cups that can be constantly reused and cleaned to reduce the environmental impact. So this is probably in the realm of something that's quite complicated that the students have offered a genuine solution to. Chris also talked about the new master's degree, so equipping those people who are aspiring to be leaders of change and hopefully transformation in the world with the necessary subject knowledge and process skills to bring that about. Now, we will be certainly talking to these students about solutions to complicated problems, but also helping them to realise the situations that aren't just complicated but are complex and that therefore probably don't have solutions. The idea of solving poverty shouldn't be something that a Warwick graduate is talking about in the world. They instead should be thinking about the nuance of complexity and responses and opportunities. So we're hoping to shape the intellectual terrain of these individuals going out in leadership roles. And we're also probably hopefully helping them to understand where interventions might need to deal with a much more anarchistic system, not encouraging them to promote it, of course, but encouraging them to be able to deal with this with sufficient intellectual gravity. The educational initiatives have become now embedded across a whole wide range of modules and courses across the university, with this gravitation towards interdisciplinarity and embedding the sustainable development goals and the thinking around them in a whole variety of modules. Particularly the politics department have led on this and have combined it with complementary approaches around kind of decolonising the curriculum and other movements. The last bit, as we mentioned, is the opportunity to turn the arrow back upon ourselves and think about campus operations. So the big highlight, again, as already mentioned, is the declaration of the climate emergency, the public recognition of the university that this is a process that has a high degree of certainty to be occurring in a certain way with certain implications for us and the rest of the stakeholders that we share our world with. I think this is also a nice example of where student learning has been taken on. It was really nice to see the students campaigning across campus for the university to declare a climate emergency. So again, as has been said, to see that impact and to see our students engaging in action and change even before they've graduated. In addition to this, the university has made great progress around its waste management, particularly trying to deal with the equipment, cooking equipment and food that gets left over after our successive cycles of students coming and going. So I know David has been strongly involved in the raucous movement to make sure that those resources don't fall out of the human economy as waste, but are retained within it as useful resource for nutrition or for further use as tools and things like this. So just to sort of to circle back, the report this year hopefully goes beyond reporting and just ticking boxes and aims to set some kind of intellectual agenda, recognizing that sustainable development is not one thing. It's contested, it's politically difficult, and it's sort of engulfed in power relationships that we have to recognize if we're going to take these issues seriously. And on that note, the report concludes not with a series of summaries, but with a series of questions that we felt were relevant to help the university shape its future. So at the top, we have something that comes directly out of our master's programme. So what vision does the university have for itself and for the world? And that's not about the sort of incremental change, what's the next little brick we can alter on the edge, but in the future, in the long-term future, what do we want this to look like? An aspirational approach as opposed to an overly managerial approach to our operations. How can we continue to contribute, of course, to the furtherance of sustainable development goals? But how can we make sure that this is on a critical level? How do we engage the faculty who may be in disciplines who don't necessarily immediately appreciate the contribution that they've got to make to these agendas, and so on and so forth? So what we really hope is that this report acts not as a kind of an endpoint for the year, but as a platform for the university going forward. And anyone who is interested in responding to these questions, to the working group and to the university, is certainly very, very welcome to provide responses to help us collectively shape the future of how the university might continue to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Agenda. So I think that draws me to a close. So I'll hand back to you, David.
Thank you, Alistair. That was incredibly insightful. I think we've also all learned a lot more about the UN SDGs through that, which are incredibly important. And it's also great that we're also managing to produce yearly now this report, which is publicly available. So next we've got the Plant and Nature Society. We've got Erin Pitcher, President, and Malika Imam, who's the Sustainability Officer, joining us. Welcome to you both, and I'm going to hand over to you so you can explain all about the new society, the Plant and Nature Society.
Hi, I'm Erin, and
I'm Malika.
We've had a few technical issues, but it's all sorted now. But thank you so much for inviting us. So as I said, I'm Erin. I'm the president and founder of Warwick Plant and Nature Society. Thank you so much for inviting us to this opportunity and allowing us to introduce ourselves and our society to the wider sustainable community. So in my first year when I joined Warwick, I wanted to join a society for nature lovers that promoted environmentalism and care of the natural world. Although there are many great societies here at Warwick, all of which do this in their own way, I did not feel like I found one that shared my vision and passion of environmentalism and care for the natural world. Therefore, I decided to found Warwick Plant and Nature Society. We're a relatively new society founded last year in term 2 of 2021. And our primary aim is to create an environmentally conscious community that shares a love for plants, nature, and promotes sustainability. We recognise as a society that it can be very hard to know where to start when wanting to get involved in nature and the environment, as well as sustainability initiatives. Not everyone has had an opportunity to get involved with nature, and we aim to challenge this. As a society, we hold the core value that sustainability and nature should be accessible to all. As a society, we believe that in order to take part in sustainable initiatives, we must first connect to and experience the environment on a first-hand basis. Therefore, a large portion of our events focus on exploring local green spaces, which many may not have known previously existed. We run regular nature walks which allow students to explore campus and the local area. For example, in this term alone, we have been to Newbold Common in Leamington Spa, as well as a scavenger hunt in Canley Ford, and we have upcoming plans to visit the War Memorial Park in Coventry, amongst other places. The nature walks which we run are accessible to all, and we encourage everyone to come along. In choosing our routes, we select places that are very easy to get to through public transport, so students can return to them at their own leisure and experience them at their own pace. Our walks are a good opportunity to meet like-minded people and come together, forming a community. We believe that this is very important for environmentalism and sustainability. Furthermore, it allows us all to learn about the natural world around us through sharing nature-based knowledge. This personal experience of nature and the formation of a natural basis of knowledge is crucial for connecting to the environment and knowing how and where to start with sustainability. In addition to our nature walks, I have also personally run sustainably focused workshops and webinars, although this was quite hard as it was last year and it was all online. Therefore, this is something we want to repeat now that we have the opportunity to do this in person. A successful workshop that we did run last year was recognising how to reduce food waste. We believe that sustainability can be an important individual effort. Therefore, these workshops provided a discussion in the way in which we as individuals can personally take part in sustainability work in our everyday lives. So our food waste workshop, we discussed the way in which you can easily regrow food scraps from the comfort of your own home. For example, you can get tips of spring onions and place them in a glass of water, which can look very cute in your own kitchen. Sustainability can easily be brought into our everyday practices, and we as a society aim to do this. Thank you. I'm now going to pass over to Malika.
Hi everyone, my name is Malika. I am doing a Master's in Global Sustainable Development here at Warwick, and I'm the Sustainability Officer for the Pact and Nature Society. So as a society, we aim to promote sustainability on campus and raise awareness about today's most pressing issues, including the climate crisis. We understand that there's various different aspects to sustainability, but as a society, our main focus remains environmental sustainability at the moment. As Erin mentioned earlier, we acknowledge and understand that it can be very hard to know when and how to start taking part in sustainable initiatives. And this is also something I myself can personally relate to. So coming from a busy city like London, you don't have as much to explore in aspects of the natural world, and that can have its own negative effects. We understand how daunting and overwhelming it can be when you're just starting out and it feels like the problems are too big and there's not enough solutions. And because of this, as a society, our aim is to create a positive place, one which we can cater to our mental health by seeking peace through our walks and have a relaxing time in nature during our hectic schedules. So being here at Warwick and a member of the Plant and Nature Society, you get a starting point to learn more about the environment and the natural world. And with the help of our upcoming initiatives, we aim to provide an encouraging atmosphere for members to take part. Therefore, our aim is to hold fun and interactive events for students from various different backgrounds to get involved. My personal vision is empowering through empathy. And when we go out and spend time in nature, which we can do at our weekly nature walks, it gives us the opportunity to connect with the environment firsthand and really appreciate what it has to offer. This invokes a feeling of connection with the natural world and hopefully the push to take action and to get involved. We are planning a fun and interactive sustainability events, and we're doing so by connecting with the wider Warwick community. So one of the events we're planning is a trip to Burton Green Honey Farms, which Warwick alumnus Alan Daly runs. So this is going to be held next term when the bees have come out of hibernation. So he has offered to speak to us about how he runs the farm, but also teach us a bit more about how bees relate to sustainability and the importance of pollinators for the survival of our natural world. The bee species are vital for the preservation of ecological balance and the biodiversity, and they're very important in the production of the food process as well. So this is also going to be followed by a honey tasting session, and that's how we aim to keep it interactive and fun as well. We're also planning other events such as holding environmental documentary screenings and also collaborating with other societies such as the Climate Reality Society for Plogging, which is picking up litter across campus. We're also looking at alternatives for plastic cups during campus events such as circling. And we're also interested in bringing back events from last year, such as the food waste workshop, and extending it to include a session on the impact of our food waste as well as composting. So these are just some of the events we're planning, and as we are a relatively new society, there's going to be loads more in the future as well. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thank you both, and thank you for the. It's wonderful that you were able to join us as well. I know that you had a few technical issues, but if you want to stay on, hopefully there will be some questions for you. Was obviously loads going on around Warwick, and we are definitely, as Chris mentioned earlier, as one of the pathways trying to increase the amount of biodiversity and green spaces across the campus as well. So. And it's also been proven, or at least scientific evidence shows, that walking in some green space, even just for a little while each day or each week, can improve our mental health and well-being and reduce things like stress and depression. So obviously those linked in with a reduced amount of emissions as well go a long way to decrease any mental health issues, which is really important. So we're now going to move on to the panel. I'm aware that we've got a few questions having come in already, but if anybody's got any more questions, I'll give a couple of questions to our panel first, and then I will also use some of the questions from the chat as well. So please do post those in. So I'm actually going to start by harking back a little bit to our COP discussion. And I think I'll start with Chris, if that's all right, Chris. Ask what your views of COP were from somebody external and watching from the outside.
Thanks, David. So I didn't, for various reasons, manage to get to COP as part of the university's delegation, but many other colleagues didn't. I know you've heard from them, and in a sense, I think they've kind of eloquently described much of what I saw as an outsider. I am by nature an optimist, and so I did have probably higher hopes for COP than I should have done. I've still never quite learned how to deal with disappointment. So I had hoped for better. I had hoped that people and governments in particular would really see the urgency of the situation. Politics took over as politics often does, and that's underpinned by shorter term and local interests. But even at the end of that, so despite that disappointment, I also, and colleagues made the same point, we did make some progress. We're in a better place now than we were before COP. That has to be a good thing. The methane pledge wasn't as good as it could have been, but it was still good. It's still progress. The deforestation pledge, not as good as it could have been, still progress. And actually, I think it was Laurie who said this year, or maybe it was Jess, I forget, but it is amazing how much interest this has generated. Yes, there's greenwash out there, of course there is. Of course there are organisations jumping on the bandwagon, but I think we've seen a step change in our understanding of what these issues are, and that has to be good as we look to the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with a lot of that. It is good to see progress, and as I learned while I was there, I think I was expecting in a way more action but the talks very much are about talking and working out what the next stage of action will actually be. So yeah, I'm going to hand over next to Alistair to answer the same question.
Thank you, David. I mean, so I think it depends on what your frame of reference is, and I think maybe I have a different perspective to other members on the panel, and this goes back to my interest in ontology, I suppose. So yes, we can take a relative perspective, and we can say what we have as pledges is an improvement on what we had before. That's tautologically true. But if we then compare that situation with the objective, non-negotiable reality of what is happening to our biosphere at the moment, and what the science with various degrees of certainty says is likely to happen in the future, and a future that's not too distant. We're given a window of by 2030. So as I mentioned, my position is one of unmitigated disaster as compared to this objective, non-negotiable set of criteria that we are dealing with. In our undergraduate degree, I teach our students about planetary boundaries. This is the idea that there are kind of, again, non-negotiable tipping points after which we'll have non-linear change. So, for example, when permafrosts melt and release the methane, that will be not a slow change, but a massive increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which will build into the system further momentum, which is already locked in from the last 10 or 20 years. So yes, I think giving people a voice in workshops, and I'm sure there was a lot of healthy and constructive discussion, but I don't see the meaningful action stacking up. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the best outcome we have is a series of words. If we look back and we use our historical lens, we know that 12 years ago, wealthy countries committed to $200 billion US to the climate fund. In October 2021, so just before the Glasgow COP, the United Nations said, accounting is difficult, but we're basically 100 billion short. The rich, wealthy countries actually paid 50% of what they committed to 12 years ago. So for me, anyone looking at these pledges and being impressed is, I think, being more hopeful and optimistic than they are realistic. First of all, it is just a pledge. History tells us that these are very likely to be undermet, and we recognise they're not significant enough in the first place. So yes, relatively we're better off. Objectively speaking, we are heading to a very difficult future, in my opinion.
Okay, and then I'm going to come over to Rex. To answer the same question, if that's all right, Rex.
Okay, so
what was your view of COP?
Yeah, so I think I've got kind of a mix between Chris and Alistair's view. So we have made progress. The agreement mentioned coal, oil, and so on, although it didn't say the end of it. We talked about methane, we talked about renewed pledges and so on, but then we are, as Alistair said, objectively insufficient. We are still overshooting the 1.5 degrees boundary by quite a bit, even with all our pledges in. And so I think for me, like just regarding the kind of expectations and so on, I think we still have got a lot of progress to make, but we've made a bit of progress, but we still need a lot. There's a lot more to do, and it would be great, or it would, maybe it's too optimistic, but we still, like in the next COP and so on, I would hope for that governments do kind of up their pledges, up their game, and see that we are getting into uncharted territories and actually do something instead of keep on discussing about it, making pledges and failing to meet those pledges.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also going to see if Erin or Malika want to come in on this at all, if you're still there. I'm aware they've been having technical issues, so Peter, would you like to? Oh, are you there?
Hi. Sorry. What was your question? Sorry. We're having a few technical issues.
That's fine. So the question was, what was your view of COP and the outcomes?
So we definitely think that a lot more could be done, and the decisions that were made, I feel like weren't as strategic as we need in today's day and age.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to quickly ask, because I'm aware that you will need to go in the next few minutes, is just with regards to the Plant Nature Society, how do people get involved? How do they get in touch with you? How do they join up?
We're a very, very easy society to join. You can just come along to our socials. We put everything on our Facebook and Instagram pages, which is at Warwick Plant Soc. We also, if you want to become an official member, you can get our membership for completely free through the Student Union website. We also have a WhatsApp group chat which you can join, which we post regular updates on how to get involved. And yeah, we're very, very easy to come along to. So definitely join us.
Thank you. Thank you both for powering through the tech issues and joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So I'm going to go on to a couple of questions now that we've had in the chat. Peter, I'm going to pull you up on for this one. The first is, I'm not sure whether you will be able to answer this, but we'll try. Does Coventry still have an energy generation embargo due to the WPD network infrastructure limitations?
Right. So that would be the Western Power Distribution, and we're aware that the network, the national grid network in Coventry is one of the weaker areas of the country. We've done a lot of research, and we'll have to look at an embargo because that would be quite a big thing. I was just reading that and I was thinking, I mean, we have a map of the different substations and the amount of room available for generating and putting the capacity back into the network. And it varies across the city, and also there's a lot of information which we're unfortunately unable to find out at this stage. But we don't think that there is an embargo, as far as we're aware, so much as there is just a big problem with the network as a whole, in that there's it's a poor position in the country relative to the power stations and relative to the original, where electricity has been traditionally generated in like the big northern coal power stations like Ratcliffe-on-Soar and so on. But if our patriarch Tony McNally were here, he would say that potentially we'd like our project to go beyond the national grid and to construct its own alternative infrastructure. He's a fan of that idea. And as are we. But yeah, it's definitely a big problem, and we know that there is already currently energy generation in Coventry, because there are several large schemes. Well, there's a large scheme with the company Inaco, who are producing. Am I right, Rex? It's like 5 megawatts. Is it 1 or 5?
I forgot the exact figures, but
yeah.
they're putting solar panels on top of, I think, 30 odd Coventry Council buildings. So I would presume that that's quite a bit of capacity.
Yes, but they're not crucially putting energy back into the national grid, I don't believe, because in most of the cases it's but our hope is that the energy is going to be produced and also used locally anyway. But that's why there's so many facets to this project, that we need lots of people. We need electrical engineering students, and we need GSD students, and we need just anyone really. We need lots and lots and lots of people to look at all these different issues. Yes.
So that kind of blends into the next question of from one person: can first-year students join the project?
Yes, we want everyone, especially first-year students, because they'll have lots of free time and they can give huge amounts of time.
So another question on this was, since it's nearly winter, the sun rises later and sets much earlier. Additionally, it seems to be quite cloudy on most days, so there may not be enough sunlight. What's the solution to this problem, and how will we be able to reach the estimated power produced? Do you want to take that, or does Rex want to take that?
Shall I go, Rex, or do you want to go? Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll take it then.
So we can.
So,
over to you.
Yeah. So I guess I've kind of learned that recently that there are kind of grade A and grade B electricity storage solutions. For grade A ones, this would be kind of batteries, which are instantaneous, and so we could potentially save up some electricity we generate from the summer into the winter time, or if we're talking about grade B storage solutions, these would be kind of backup generation facilities. So in the very near future, we're probably still going to be using some fossil fuel power stations. Hopefully it's only gas and no oil or coal and so on, but then these could serve as reserve. But then I think looking into kind of what happened during summer in this country, we do see kind of renewables, their generation varies throughout the year, and so this summer we did see a lot less wind, but then we had quite a bit of sun, and then this winter we would probably have quite a bit of wind but less sun, and so if we kind of diversify our portfolio, diversify our energy mix, then we could potentially use different renewable technologies to complement each other and achieve a kind of higher renewable energy mix throughout our national power system.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a number of solar panels, well, most solar panels now don't need kind of direct sunlight, as it were. It just needs to be bright,
they just need
one way, even if there's a cloud cover. Yeah. So the panels themselves are getting better. They're getting cheaper, which is fantastic. And I believe the admin costs of panels have actually overtaken the cost of panels now. So it's very much moving in the right direction, which is fantastic. So I've got another question here. I'm going to aim it towards Vulcan, if that's all right, Vulcan. Do you feel that COP26 failed to meet hopes for action with climate justice, with loss and damage? And where do you think we can go from here with this issue? I'll go to you and then to Alistair, if that's okay.
David, you can also answer this well yourself. Yeah, I think the hope was a lot when we were going to the COP, but as Chris also said, I think one of the most beneficial points after the COP was like the interest in the public to COP from people that you don't expect who to pay attention to environmental issues. Was my father-in-law was asking me like about COP, who had nothing to do with environmental issues for all his life. So this kind of action in all around the world, like improved engagement in all around the world, was the most beneficial part. Of course, the climate justice is another issue. In COP, for example, we saw the group of the most vulnerable countries there who will be affected mostly, like they may lose these low island nations may lose all their habitats. They will be underwater basically, and some Amazonian people were there, like indigenous people to Amazon forest, so they will lose because of these deforestation issues all their habitat to live. So we are really affecting, and we are the reason in developed countries or in G20 countries particularly generating all this problem for them, and they don't have any means of fighting against so this one. So that's why, of course, there was a climate injustice here and justice issues. But if we change our way of life and if we basically fight against climate change here at home, it will affect all around the world. I think that is also another positive way maybe to look at the issue. We don't need to always pay to these people some money to do something there. Actually, what we do in our own countries are affecting them. So that's why we can solve this kind of justice issues by just changing our lifestyle here. That's what I want to say. And this was also highlighted in the event as well. Yeah, thank you. I hope I addressed it a little bit. I can maybe pass to David.
Yeah, I'll follow on from that. I think with regards to hopes for action, at least from my own side, I think I will hope that there will be more action. I went in to COP, I think, with one version in my head of what COP was and came out with a completely different version. And I think it's too early at the moment to say whether it will meet the hopes for action. There is still time. COP26 does lie with the UK government for the next 12 months. There needs to be a legacy that the UK government can still push on, and it needs to push on it. It needs to leverage all of its remaining support from countries worldwide to push this discussion forward and ensure that all the pledges are actually met. I think where we can go is in ensuring that we're doing actions on a personal level that we can do, of which there are so many, even kind of with governments and businesses to one side, we can do loads. Also engage the businesses that we're in, whether it be the universities, whether it be local businesses, or just any supply chains that we're talking to. And then also obviously making sure we're voting in the right people who will actually take a stance and actually do something within our own governments. And at least from the business and supply chain, and also in a way from the government side, that also has the effect on climate justice. If we're pushing them towards doing the right thing, making sure they've got their various governance structures in place and actually supporting social change, then that will mean that we are, I think, moving towards the idea of a just transition, making sure that we're bringing everybody along with us, rather than leaving anybody behind, and ensuring that we're not leaving the poorest, most vulnerable people to fend for themselves as well. I'm also going to bring in Chris on this, if that's okay, Chris, as well.
Yeah, sure. And you know, I think it raises an important point. It was one of the things that I was struck by when we had our feedback session from the university's COP26 delegation, that the number of people from the university who attended and who had been struck particularly by the significance of the issue around climate justice and just transitions, and the realization that this wasn't necessarily getting the attention that it should. And you know, I think it's really difficult, because actually we've got massive legacies here, and something that always concerns me, I think, is you know, let's take the very obvious tension between, do you buy flowers that have been air freighted from Kenya or do you not? Now, in an economy that has been structured with that as an incentive to set up, to help develop activity locally, to cut that off is potentially really quite damaging. But can you justify buying flowers air freighted from Kenya? So you've got some real tensions there, and that's where it comes back to, I think, the funding that needs to be put in, where I think some of the cuts that we've put into GCRF funding and others are unforgivable, because we've actually got to support those economic transformations in countries where we've interfered to create kind of a supply chain that we wanted. We've now got to actually aid transition to a supply system that they want, and that will ultimately be beneficial, but it's a long and difficult transition. So do we need to do more? Absolutely, massively so.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding from Alistair there. Do you want to come in on this, Alistair?
Yeah. So I mean, I can't speak to the technicalities of loss and damage. It's not my thing. But what I do reflect on is the unfortunate timing of the UK being responsible for chair this particular COP, which is even more historically important than all the previous ones. I think it is insightful. So the 2014 IPCC report said we need global carbon neutrality by 2075. And at that point, the British government said we have a historical obligation to make sure that British neutrality, carbon neutrality comes before then, because we are more responsible than other countries. We have to do this to give other people a chance. Later on, the IPCC updated their predictions, and they said it's way worse than we thought. We need global neutrality by 2050. Now, the obvious moral, appropriately political and self-aware choice for the British government would have been to say, OK, we've already recognised our historical responsibility. We bring our timeline forward and we work like hell, and we use state capacity to fund these things. We invest appropriately in overseas aid and we contribute properly to the Global Climate Fund. But they didn't. Theresa May announced that the UK was making history by being the first country to declare carbon neutrality by 2050. So that's the sort of the history of the British government's thought leadership, or lack thereof, I would say, on global climate justice. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. So at this point, we need to invest heavily in replacing, I would say, market relationships with state-directed aid. We need to think ourselves, as colleagues have mentioned, about, and again, I think there's two useful categories here. What are my needs and what are my desires? And when I have a desire, at what end of the continuum are they? Are they closer to a need, or are they closer to a full-on desire? And this way, through personal action, we can look to contribute. But we absolutely also need to pressure the state for meaningful action. If we don't, the most powerful institutions in the world are going to fall short of their historical obligations, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned the IPCC there as well. One of the things that I learned during my training through the Climate Reality Project was that they started the year I was born, and we have gone past every worst case scenario they've ever put forward at speed. Kind of during my entire life, essentially. So they're saying one date, but we've got to remember that the IPCC is generally kind of standardized. Everybody has to agree what's put in it, which means there is a chance that there is a worst case scenario than the one they're putting forward. So we really need to work and act on all of this with immediate effect, essentially. We do also have one question from a university in Kosovo, which is, what is your opinion about countries in transition regarding the stability in the curricula, and what advice would you give? Vulcan or Alistair, do you want to go for this one?
Yeah, I'll put my Education for Sustainable Development hat on, and I mean, I think for me, universities and all sorts of educational institutions have always focused on kind of the subject content of understanding certain things, be it history, politics, engineering. I think what we're increasingly realizing is that we need to emphasize much more skill sets. So the ability to understand, again, kind of the metaphysics of the world. What are we dealing with? What's a rigorous and appropriate way to create our own knowledge about this? How do we think critically? Because we, I think, traditionally have educated our students to sort of say, well, you know, here's the answer. When you encounter this situation, do this, and it's an appropriate response. This is the right answer. With the complexity and the arguable anarchy of the sustainable development and the kind of emergency climate emergency crisis, the whole game has changed. We need generations of people leaving universities with the ability to interpret and to diagnose and to respond to questions and challenges. So, you know, my feeling is focusing on those kind of process skills, and that means for me introducing students and getting them involved in research much sooner in their academic careers. So it's why I'm so pleased to hear from the solar panel project. You know, these are students who are actively contributing to knowledge as they are learning themselves. And for me, this is what a university, you know, should be about. So thank you for the students for your, you know, interest in going above and beyond just coming to university to kind of learn and take knowledge away. You're contributing to our collective project while you're here. So that'd be a yeah, some initial thoughts.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to pass over to Vulcan.
Yeah, I want to continue from what Alistair was talking about. So I think this transition is also driven by the interest of the students. This is what I'm at first-hand experiencing. So we can't, how to say, base our examples on standard traditional 1920s or 1930s examples anymore. So the students do not find it interesting. So they want more sustainability when we are teaching it. So therefore we are still using the same mathematical principles which were probably established in like 200 years ago, but we have to modify it and apply it to really sustainability related issues. We can't say anymore like how to produce electricity from coal as a thermodynamics example, but we say generation of electricity from renewable resources. It's again the same course, same thermodynamics that we're teaching, but all our examples, all our case studies are changed because the students are driving this change as well. I think the transition for institutions are, the more we listen to the students, the more we will change and we will move forward, I think, and engaging students in these education practices, different types of learning rather than chalk on the board, like more like case studies, projects, small group discussions that will drive this transition towards sustainability and help us to embed more sustainability in our curriculum, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Vulcan. And I'm also going to call on Peter as well as a recent graduate, just on his thoughts. And also, I think we've also had a question on how to get involved with the solar project. So if you want to also let people know how they can do that as well.
Okay, I'll just see if I can put the our person we work with his email address in the chat. Can everyone see that on the Q&A? Or I think I've put it in the right place. You're on mute, I'm afraid, again. Sorry, David.
Okay, try again. I was going to say, if you'd like to maybe say the name of the group, and people can Google it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're Climate Change Solutions, which is a Coventry-based company, and we work with Tony McNally and Richard Berry. So if you can find out about them, I'll put my email address as well. I'll put that in a minute. Your question was about sustainability in the curriculum.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
In developing countries.
Well, I think it just generally in the curricula, to be honest. I think what advice would you give to universities generally about the way you would want to see your curricula?
Well, I mean,
Alistair and Vulcan was talking about moving more towards almost a placement-based, project-based system. I think there.
It seems like a fantastic idea. I did history as my undergrad, so there wasn't much talk of sustainability in but I think, you know, it's a bit like decolonizing the curriculum as well. It's something that has to partly come from the students, and it's something that I think does come from the students a lot. I'm assuming, being a student myself and never like interacted with students en masse, but speaking for our group, I think like a lot of us are very passionate about these kinds of problems, and they help us to engage. So I think we feel like we feel heard when they're part of the debate and part of the discussion, when it's framed. I mean, obviously, in terms of GSD, like that is literally the core of what it is. But even in other subjects, I think it's important that it's framed in like in a way that's resonant with modern day problems. Yes.
I'd also, I think, lastly, like to bring in Rex, if that's okay, Rex, if you've got any thoughts on changing curricula in transition countries.
So I think that's an interesting question. So, I mean, I currently study GSD, so I guess I'm benefiting to some degree from a sustainability course, and I think this can be replicated across the world. But then, apart from these kind of more broad-based degrees, like I think as Vulcan has mentioned, I think in some industries like engineering, you do kind of need some quite specific, quite technical knowledge about sustainability. And so I think in those subjects, maybe an industrial placement or somehow, or maybe a model about sustainability engineering or something. I don't know how to I don't have the technical knowledge about that, but if those things can be kind of integrated into the curriculum, and so kind of everyone graduating would have some sense of sustainability that's kind of related to their fields of study, I think that would be a good way forward.
Thank you, Rex. Yeah, I think from what I've learned from the non-academic side of the university, having a integrated, interdisciplinary view on things is incredibly important. Not just for the general education side, but also the integrating it more easily, things more easily into careers beyond the education realm as well. So I am aware of time. I'd like to just thank all of our contributors today. So to thank Chris, Vulcan, Rex, Laurie, Jess, Alistair, Peter, Erin, and Malika for attending and joining us and presenting, and I think giving some incredibly insightful comments and thoughts for this evening. I do also just want to mention before we finish as well, we talking of taking action and creating change, educating. We do have Green Week coming up in March, so a bit of a heads up for everybody. So 7th to the 13th of March, this will be across Coventry and Warwickshire. And we just want everybody to get involved in any way they see fit, just to take action on sustainability and make that change. You can also get involved with us, in touch with us about that or anything else to do with sustainability at Warwick by either following us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find a lot of the information spoken about this evening via the website that you can see there, /sustainability, with new links to other kind of the wider sustainability website that we've recently created, and also you can email us at sustainability@warwick.ac.uk. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. I hope that was inspirational and useful, and we look forward to hearing and working with you all soon. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Yes.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, everyone.